alien child never smiled. Not when the twin suns rose over Elindra's spires, not during crown rituals or festival days, not even when the galaxy's greatest jesters were summoned by decree, but when a tired human janitor dropped his mop and whispered, "Peekaboo." The silence that had wrapped around her heart cracked, and something rare and bright escaped. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this brighten your day, tap that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unexpected than this one. The throne room of Elindra Prime was carved from memory itself. Its arches were woven from crystallized starlight, and the windows flickered with distant nebulae, captured in real time by ancient quantum arrays. Every inch of it whispered legacy. The chairs were too grand for comfort, the carpets too precise for warmth. At the center, a girl sat, legs folded, spine too straight for a child. Her lavender skin shimmered faintly with the hues of her mood, though they had remained muted for years. Light blue, faint gray, never joy, never fire. She was known by many names. The air unspoken, the silent bloom. But her given name, spoken only by her mother when the guards had gone and the corridors stood empty, was Nyari. And Nyari did not laugh. Entertainers had come from 13 systems. Acrobats danced on gravity spindles. Illusionists summoned creatures made of cloud and spark. Even the empaths of Verlux, whose only gift was to mirror the feelings of others until they became shared, had failed. One by one, they bowed and left, their eyes downcast, their craft bruised by the girl who never changed. The queen did not punish them. She merely thanked them. Her own grief was not so far removed that she couldn't recognize another's. Still, each failure deepened the silence between them. And though the galaxy believed the child to be cursed, the queen knew better. Nyari had not smiled since her father vanished into the outer void 6 years ago. No body had returned, no signal, only a crown delivered in a box wrapped in cold starlight, his, scorched and cracked. Since then, the child had ruled beside her mother in title only, observing, absorbing, always quiet, always still. It was said that the royal line of Elindra passed down a gift, a gentle thread of empathic awareness that could sense the truths others buried. But Nyari's gift had dulled. She sat beside her mother each day like a statue chiseled from sadness. On this day, the chamber hummed with administrative tedium. Petitions, trade disputes, the usual parade of galaxy-scale pettiness. Ministers murmured. Robes rustled. A delegation from the Trisari moons had brought their usual demands for mineral tariffs, their voices oily and tired. The queen listened with regal patience. Nyari sat beside her, eyes fixed forward, hands folded in her lap, unmoving. But in the farthest shadow of the throne hall, someone moved. Not a noble, not a senator, a man, earthborn, mid-40s maybe. He wore the blue jumpsuit of the Custodial Guild, Tier 6. His name tag was scuffed, but still legible. Ward Elias. He crouched near a column, dragging a mop across the polished obsidian floor. The mop squeaked faintly with each pass. No one noticed him. No one ever did, except the girl. Her eyes flicked toward him for a moment, just a heartbeat of attention. He didn't see. He was humming to himself softly, tunelessly, and in a language only a few in the palace still recognized. English. It wasn't magic. It wasn't dramatic, but for the first time in 5 years, Princess Nyari blinked twice and tilted her head, as if something inside her had shifted just slightly toward light. The queen, sitting beside her daughter, felt the pulse, the faintest echo of something long buried. Hope, Elias Ward, didn't mean to be seen. That was the first rule of janitorial service in royal courts, especially alien ones. Be thorough, be silent, and above all, be invisible. His mop moved in even arcs, guided by muscle memory and tired joints. He'd cleaned a dozen palaces in as many systems, but Elindra Prime was the strangest. Not because of its architecture or the air that smelled faintly of stars, but because of its silence. Too many places in the galaxy buzzed with power, swagger, tension. Here, everything felt suspended, like breath being held for too long. He had taken this contract because it paid extra for off-world travel, hazardous air, and Class A diplomatic discretion. It also came with private quarters, a rarity. That mattered because back home on Station K9, his daughter Josie was asleep on a cot 2 walls away. The soft hum of the palace's life support her lullaby. She was 11, a stargazer, a maker of paper robots, and the reason he scrubbed alien tiles at midnight instead of teaching mechanics back on Earth. Elindra's peaceful, the recruiter had said. Quiet work, no riots, no spills really. Royal family just needs things spotless. Think of it as polishing history. Elias hadn't realized how literal that was until he got here. The floors themselves were woven with obsidian veins, shaped to reflect not just light, but the past. Every scuff he removed revealed ghostly echoes of past rulers, their triumphs recorded in shifting patterns. But he didn't pause to admire it. He had work to do. Besides, Elias had long learned that wonder was a privilege, and he was far too tired for that. He hadn't even noticed the child at first. The throne sat so high, the hall so wide, the distance too great for someone like him to even register the royalty at eye level. But something strange had started happening in recent weeks. Every time he rounded the column near the western wall, he'd feel it a prickling behind the ears, like someone was watching, not with menace, just attention. That day, as he swept the remnants of cosmic dust tracked in from some diplomat's boots, he dropped his mop by accident. It clattered, then skidded in an almost comedic arc across the polished floor, stopping just short of a senator's robes. He winced. "Ah, hell," he muttered, lunging to retrieve it. When he looked up, he froze. The child, Princess Nyari, was staring at him, not blankly, not absently. With curiosity, their eyes met for no more than 3 seconds. But in that moment, Elias felt something pass between them. Not words, not understanding, just recognition. A flicker, a pulse. Then she looked away, as if nothing had happened. But something had. That evening, back in his quarters, Josie was waiting with her latest sketch, a girl with purple skin and stars in her hair. "She looks lonely," Josie said. "But I think she wants to laugh." Elias stared at the drawing. He didn't tell her what had happened. He didn't need to, because somehow his daughter had already seen it. And that night, when the stars outside their window blinked in their slow pulse across Elindra's sky, Elias dreamed of a smile that hadn't yet happened, but felt like it already had. The next morning began like all the others. Elias arrived an hour before sunrise, before the first diplomat's ship broke the sky, before the air filtration pulses stirred the curtains of the throne room. He carried his mop, his bucket, and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Josie always made him one, even though he was usually too tired to eat it until much later. The hall of ether glass was empty, its silence thick as syrup. The light, pale and blue, filtered down from the vaulted skylights and made the marble shimmer like a frozen sea. He set his bucket down at the edge of the eastern corridor and began his routine, humming under his breath, not because he was happy, but because the silence otherwise felt too loud. The tune was old, earth-old, a lullaby his wife used to sing to Josie in those first fragile months, back when the galaxy still felt full of possibility. Elias hadn't meant to hum it. It just escaped, like breath, like memory. He was on the second column when he noticed it. Movement, not grand, not sudden, just a shift. The girl was there again, Nyari, already seated beside the throne, her posture as stiff as ever, but her head was tilted ever so slightly in his direction. Not in defiance, not in command, just listening. Elias didn't stop humming. He didn't speak. He simply moved down the line, mop gliding in quiet arcs across the floor. His voice low and warm and cracked with age. "You are my moonlight. You are my sea. Rocking in stardust, dreaming of me." He reached the last tile and turned. She was still watching, not fully, not obviously. But her eyes remained tilted toward him, her face softer somehow. It was like a window had cracked open, just slightly, in a sealed room. A sigh escaped her, not a word, not even a breath shaped with intent. Just sound, small and trembling, the sound of something ancient waking. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably near the dais. He'd noticed it too, But the queen, seated beside her daughter, said nothing. Her hand, resting on the throne's arm, clenched once, then relaxed. Elias kept cleaning, kept humming. Later, in the mess hall, a steward asked him if he had done something. "The princess. She looked at you," the man whispered, awed and nervous. "She's never..." Elias shrugged. "Just mopping floors, man." But the humming returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time, Nyari leaned forward a little more. Each time, her expression became a fraction less stone, and in the quiet after the diplomats had gone, the queen stood alone at the edge of the throne room and whispered toward the shadows. "Who taught you that song?" But no one answered, because the janitor was already gone, mop drying in the supply room, his daughter's drawing folded in his pocket, and far above, the moons of Alindra watched the palace with their soft, silver glow as if waiting, as if listening. The day it happened wasn't remarkable by any grand celestial event. No solar flares rippled through the sky. No ancient comet arced across the palace spires. It was just another day in the long, quiet life of the Alindran court. The throne room had its usual rhythm, diplomats posturing, robes whispering across tile, the queen listening with regal restraint, and Nyari beside her, a child-shaped statue of silence. Elias had no plan. He never did. He arrived before dawn as usual, nodding at the guards who never nodded back, bucket in one hand, a rag tucked into his belt. His uniform was still damp from yesterday's rinse. His knees ached. His back reminded him that youth had long since moved out of his bones. And yet, as always, he hummed. Today's tune was lighter, something silly, an Earth Children's rhyme, half remembered and half improvised. Something about bunnies and bananas and a girl who lost her shoes on Mars. Josie had made it up years ago on the ride to a refugee school orbiting Ganymede. Elias bent down to scrub a stubborn scuff where a senator's hover cloak had burned the tile edge. His rag slipped from his fingers. It flopped dramatically onto his boot. He looked at it. Then, on instinct alone, he gasped. He slapped both hands to his cheeks and made a face. Eyes wide, mouth agape, mock horror and playfulness bundled in a single absurd expression. The rag just lay there, limp and innocent, but something had shifted behind him. He turned slowly. Nyari was staring directly at him, not the cautious, peripheral glance she'd offered before, not the shy tilt of curiosity. Direct, eyes locked, and her lip, just the faintest edge of it, was curling upward. Elias blinked. He lifted the rag slowly, as if it were a sacred relic, and waved it like a puppet. "What's this?" he whispered, voice too soft for anyone else to hear. "An alien invader? A space goblin?" Nyari blinked, her lavender eyelids fluttering. He narrowed his eyes. "Don't move, princess. It's gonna..." He flicked the rag. "Getcha." The sound that followed was not loud. It wasn't even complete. It was more like the memory of a giggle, reaching up from some dusty corner of her chest. But it happened. The chamber went still. A guard dropped his pike. The queen sat motionless, but her eyes glistened. Nyari raised a hand to her mouth, confused, as if her own body had betrayed her. Her eyes were wide with something new, not just surprise, not just joy, recognition of something lost. Elias, still crouched, felt a strange tightness behind his eyes. He cleared his throat, stood, grabbed his mop, and tried to retreat into his usual rhythm. He didn't dare look back, but he didn't need to, because from her seat of cold carved starlight, the alien princess, the one who had not smiled in 5 years, was still watching him. And this time, she wasn't alone inside herself. She was reaching towards something warm, something terribly human. He almost didn't go back the next day, not because he was afraid, though maybe he was a little. Not of punishment, but of ruining it. Whatever it was. He didn't have the language for moments like that. Elias Ward was a janitor, a single dad, and a man who knew how to fix broken pumps and polish alien tile until it gleamed like obsidian glass. But he didn't know how to fix a child's silence. He didn't know how to make royalty laugh without consequences. Still, at 0400, he woke like he always did. Josie stirred on her cot and asked if the sandwich she packed yesterday had gone bad. He kissed the top of her head. "I ate it," he lied. "Best sandwich of my life." And then he went to work. The guards watched him differently now. Not with suspicion, not quite, but with the cautious alertness one reserves for someone who might turn out to matter after all. He ignored them, wheeled his bucket into the hall of ether glass, and paused. She was already there, not just sitting beside the queen. Nyari had moved, just a few feet off her throne's dais, onto the step below, still regal, still distant, but closer. She had something in her lap, a box, sleek and organic in design, alien craftsmanship, no doubt, but what startled him most was the way she clutched it, tightly, like a child with something breakable and dear. Elias walked to his usual place, dipped the mop, swirled it once. He could feel her watching again. He didn't speak, not at first, then softly, "So, you like rags, or was that a one-time thing?" Silence. He risked a glance. Nyari didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. He leaned on the mop like it was a microphone stand. "You know," he said, "back on Earth, when my daughter was small, she'd hide behind the couch every time I came home. Said she was invisible. Said if I couldn't find her, she'd win the universe." Nyari tilted her head. "So I'd stomp around and go, 'Where's my Josie? Is she behind the couch? Is she on the ceiling? Is she under the toaster?' He threw his hands up, and every time she'd squeak and jump out, yelling, 'Peekaboo,' like she'd invented the joke." Nyari blinked. Her mouth parted slightly. Elias didn't move. She thought it made her a magician, making herself disappear, making me smile. And then, very slowly, very gently, he raised both hands to his face, lowered them, and whispered, "Peekaboo." Nyari gasped, not a startled sound, not fear. A tiny, sharp inhalation, the kind only children make when something delights them before they've figured out why. Her hand came to her mouth again. She turned toward her mother almost reflexively, then stopped. The queen did not speak, but she nodded, once. A queen's nod, full of centuries and something older. Permission. Nyari turned back to Elias. And then, she whispered it. "Peek-a-boo." Elias laughed, soft and stunned. "That's it," he said. "You got it." And just like that, they weren't a janitor and a princess anymore. They were two people who had shared a secret, a joke small enough to fit in a pocket and powerful enough to break the orbit of grief. It began like dawn, not fast, not loud, but with the slow warmth of something inevitable rising after too long in the dark. She smiled. No trumpets announced it. No beams of divine light broke through the stained glass domes of Alindra's vaulted throne room. It was quiet, almost shy, a small lopsided thing, more a curve of breath than a declaration. But it happened, and in that moment, the palace forgot how to breathe. Elias saw it first. He had just finished the peek-a-boo gesture again, gentler this time, no big performance. Just his palms hiding his tired face, then lowering with a simple grin and wide eyes. No one else in the galaxy would have called it art. But Nyari did, because this time, she didn't just mimic the words. She felt them. The air between them shifted. Her shoulders dropped. Her violet eyes shimmered faintly, not with tears, but with something cleaner. Laughter building like sunlight under skin. Then it came a giggle, soft, cracked from disuse, but real. Her mouth opened, and the sound that had not existed in the palace since her father's disappearance slipped out like a secret, silver and fragile and whole. The queen stood. Gasps scattered across the gallery balconies like startled birds. Guards froze mid-step. A minister dropped a stylus, the sound sharp against the obsidian floor. A scribe nearby burst into tears. But the queen, she didn't speak. She just watched. Her daughter, her still, quiet, unreachable child, was laughing. Nyari clutched her box tight in her lap. "Again," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Do it again." Elias could barely think. His heart was thundering like a hammer in his chest, not from nerves but something else. Relief? Awe? The wild, surreal joy of knowing he had helped somehow this galaxy-shrouded child remember a piece of herself. He lifted his hands. "Peek," he said slowly, playfully. She leaned forward. Boo. This time she laughed fully, not just a smile, not just a noise, a laugh pure and unhollowed. It bounced against the high ceilings like wind chimes hit by a soft summer breeze. It echoed, spun, lifted, and landed gently in every corner of the hall. The Queen sat back down. Her hand came to her face, as if to hold something in, but it was too late. A single tear fell, not of pain, not of grief, of release. A release 5 years in the making. Elias didn't know where to look. His instincts told him to disappear. He had broken some sacred law, surely. He had crossed lines drawn by blood and ceremony and galaxy-spanning protocol. And yet, no guard came. Instead, one of the royal stewards, pale and blinking, stepped forward slowly. "Do you need water?" he asked the princess. Nyari giggled again. "No, I want to play." "Play," the steward repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. Elias cleared his throat. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "I should probably—" But Nyari shook her head. "Stay," she said. "Please." And for the first time since stepping foot in Elindra Prime, the janitor was no longer part of the background. He was the moment everyone had waited for. He had brought back the daylight, and it had arrived in the form of a little girl's smile. The Queen had not moved for some time, even after the laughter faded, after her daughter leaned back on the throne, still beaming with the shock of her own joy. The Queen remained still spine tall, hands folded, eyes focused on nothing and everything all at once. When she finally blinked, it was slow. Like waking from a dream she never thought she'd survive long enough to see. But others in the palace were not so composed. By noon, the whispers began. Before dusk, they had grown teeth. The janitor violated sacred proximity laws. He cast some human enchantment, primitive mimicry, emotion, manipulation via mimic response, highly dangerous in empathic lineages. If the girl's powers return and are untrained, we could lose a generation of control. And so, the high ministers met in a chamber carved of blackstone and quiet arguments. They formed a half-moon around a single table, intended for galactic treaties, not panic-stricken discussions of Earthmen playing peek-a-boo. "He's a risk," hissed Senator Kwon, a scaled diplomat with obsidian rings stacked on all 6 fingers. "If she bonds to him, we lose influence over her decisions." "She's 6, another minister said flatly. "7, corrected the Queen's advisor. "She has not spoken in years," Kwon spat. "And now she giggles and plays games with a floor scrubber. We are not raising a jester, we are raising a monarch." The room buzzed with agreement. It was not hatred that stirred them. It was fear. Fear of what joy could awaken in the child. Fear of what joy might undo. One voice cut through the hum. The Queen. She stood at the archway. Her crown dimmed, its bioluminescence softened to the color of dusk. "If you have words about my daughter," she said, "you will use them in my presence." Chairs scraped back. No one had heard her enter. The Queen walked into the center of the room and laid a single datapad on the table. "This is a log of every attempt made to reach her. 6 years of efforts, thousands of hours, dozens of systems." She looked up, eyes sharp as starlight. "And none succeeded." "But he's a janitor," someone whispered, as if the word itself held poison. The Queen nodded. "Yes, he is." And then she smiled, not out of joy, but precision, which means he is not performing, not trying to impress. He has nothing to gain, no agenda, just a mop, a bucket, and a child of his own. A hush followed. "Let him continue," the Queen said. "You will not interrupt this." "But Your Majesty," Kwon pressed. "He has no training in alien developmental protocols, no awareness of empathic boundaries. He could say anything." The Queen turned to leave. "He already has," she said. "He said peek-a-boo, and it worked." She left them to their silence. Meanwhile, Elias sat cross-legged at the edge of the throne room, tapping his fingers against the marble to the rhythm of some Earth nursery tune, watching as Nyari tried to mimic the beat with her own tiny hands. He didn't know a council had met. He didn't know powerful beings had argued his worth. He just knew that for the first time, the girl was playing, and that to him was all the reason he needed to show up tomorrow. It began with a whisper, then a ripple. By the end of the week, it was a wave. "Did you hear?" An ambassador from the Khazari whispered to her attendant as she adjusted her headdress woven from sunfish scales. The princess laughed. The attendant blinked. "You mean?" Smiled. "No," the ambassador said, eyes wide. She laughed, giggled, played. "With a janitor?" The attendant froze. "Is it permitted?" "No. That's why everyone's talking." The next day, the court schedule changed. It wasn't declared officially. No one issued a memo or adjusted the digital schedule grid. But delegates, some of whom had been waiting months to be heard, quietly moved their hearings, nudged appointments, shifted timelines, all to align their visits with a curious new phenomenon: the janitor's rounds. Elias, for his part, didn't notice at first. He had enough to focus on keeping his back straight, despite the endless bending, managing supply logs, and making sure the liquid polisher didn't corrode the tiles in the western corridor. He showed up, like always, mop in hand, and greeted Nyari the same way every morning. "Peek." She would grin, hiding behind a cushion or her sleeve. He'd raise one eyebrow, draw it out like it was a sacred incantation. "Boo." Her laugh echoed off the marble, caught in the obsidian ceiling like a melody too sacred to write down. By the third day of this, the audience benches were full. Quietly, respectfully, but full. A Threxian trade envoy pretended to adjust his sash for 10 minutes just to get a clearer view. A Valari senator cancelled a lunch with a military council to observe what had begun to be called the moment. And then, something stranger happened. Language shifted. One of the Queen's aides, who had long studied earth tongues out of curiosity, recorded the ritual. "Peek-a-boo," he explained to the linguists gathered around the playback crystal, "is a primitive Terran game meant to develop object permanence in infants. But functionally, it's emotional calibration. A way to remind the child that absence is not abandonment." There was a silence. Then the Tanari scholar, whose species understood grief as a biological contagion, leaned forward. "That," she said slowly, "is diplomacy." The Queen did not make a show of it, but she began attending the sessions more attentively. She had a cushion added near the dais, softer and lower, so Nyari could leave the throne when she wished. And she did. Often. One day, Nyari offered her box to Elias. Inside was a small hollow disc. He activated it, and a glowing orb appeared, spinning with colors only Elendran eyes could fully perceive. "Your toy?" Elias asked gently. She shook her head. "It's my memory. I keep it here when it hurts too much." Elias nodded, understanding deeper than she expected. He didn't ask what was inside. He just held the box carefully, with the reverence of a man who had once held his daughter's favorite blanket the night after her mother passed. From the balconies above, a diplomat turned to another. "If that janitor can do in 10 minutes what our embassies failed to do in years," the other raised a brow. "Perhaps we've been training the wrong kind of envoy." And so, from a mop and a child's giggle, diplomacy found new shape, not in power, but in presence, not in demands, but in peek-a-boo. There were moments now when the palace felt warmer, not physically. Elindra Prime's climate controls were surgically precise, but in spirit, as if the chill that had once lived in the corners of its grand corridors had lifted, replaced by something subtler. Breath shared, laughter echoed, time softened. Elias didn't know how it had happened. He still scrubbed tile, still woke early, still packed a sandwich Josie wouldn't eat but insisted on making. The only thing that changed was everything. Nyari greeted him every morning now. No longer from the cold distance of the throne, but from the base of the steps, her feet bare, her expression expectant. She no longer flinched at sound. She asked questions, sometimes odd ones. "Why do your knees pop when you sit down? Did Earth really have rain that smelled? Is it true humans see ghosts only when they're awake?" He did his best to answer. Sometimes he didn't know. She never seemed to mind. That morning, he brought something new with him. A music box. Not ornate, not alien, not Elindran crystal tech or a gift from some interstellar artisan. It was wooden, hand-carved, slightly cracked. Josie had given it to him once, back when they had still lived in the cramped refugee domes circling Titan. She'd said, so you don't forget what a lullaby feels like. Now, Elias set it gently on the floor in front of Nyari. She eyed it with caution. It's safe, he said. It doesn't glow or talk or beam thoughts into your skull. It just plays. He turned the crank. Soft notes spilled out. Tinkling, imperfect. The melody wobbled on the edge of sadness, the kind of tune that knew the shape of longing but offered peace anyway. Nyari blinked. Her eyes shimmered faintly. I know this, she whispered. Elias froze. You do? She nodded. Not this song, but this feeling, this sound. She reached out, touched the edge of the box. Her fingers trembled. My father, she said, used to hum something like this. Not quite, but close. At night before I slept. When I dreamed, I always knew he was near if I heard it. Elias said nothing. She closed her eyes, listening to the music spiral through the marble hall like a bird too shy to land. You're a father, she said after a moment. I can feel it. He nodded. I am. To a daughter? Yeah. Nyari opened her eyes. Does she play peekaboo with you? He chuckled softly. She used to. Now she just pretends I don't exist when her friends call. Nyari tilted her head. That's rude. No. Elias smiled. That's growing up. She fell quiet, staring at the music box. Her lip trembled once, then stilled. I forgot his voice, she said. But I remember how it made me feel. Elias leaned back on his heels. That's the part that matters, he said quietly. The feeling stays. It finds you again. She reached for the music box, cradling it to her chest like something sacred, and somewhere in the balconies above, the queen closed her eyes, her own breath catching in the space between memory and mercy. Because even across worlds, across loss, across time, daughters remember. It began with unease, not orders. There was no decree, no stamped document, only a feeling coiled and whispering, slithering through the palace halls like cold smoke. Where there had once been silence, now there were murmurs. Where there had been stillness, now sidelong glances and doors quietly closing. He's too close to her, someone said. Too trusted, whispered another. They didn't say his name, but everyone knew. Elias Ward, the janitor who had made the princess laugh, was now a problem. At first, it was small. A steward accidentally locked the custodial supply room. His mop went missing. A shift schedule was revised, so he'd arrive too late to see Nyari in the mornings. But Elias adjusted, quietly. He found another mop, used an old rag, came early, earlier than anyone expected. Then, the surveillance began. Hidden scans, motion trackers watching the throne room from new angles. Officials logged each interaction between Elias and Nyari like they were preparing a case. Not because he had broken anything, but because something precious had changed, and people in power always fear what they don't control. Nyari sensed it before Elias did. They watch us now, she said one morning. Elias glanced up. He didn't see anything, but he didn't need to. I figured, he muttered. Do they think you're dangerous? She asked. He hesitated. They think change is dangerous, and I changed. He didn't answer. He just nodded and handed her the old cloth, damp with warm water, and together they traced soft spirals on the marble. Quiet as always, rebellious as always. That evening, a meeting was called deep beneath the palace in the Hall of Deliberation, a room reserved for crises. 12 officials gathered in a circle of light, their faces strained with fear masked as formality. She is developing emotional dependence, said the Minister of Protocol. Her empathic field is linking to a non-royal, a human, a janitor. Worse, said the Chancellor of Internal Order. A father, someone with their own emotional code, not conditioned, not loyal to the crown. What if she listens to him more than us? A silence. Then, remove him, quietly. Terminate his contract. Say the funding changed. They all nodded. Practical. Clean. But someone else had been listening. Nyari. She had wandered the lower halls often since her laughter returned. The guards no longer tracked her like glass. She slipped through shadows like light under a closed door. She had heard every word. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't run to her mother. She sat in the throne room long after the lights dimmed, tracing circles into the floor where Elias had once made her laugh. When morning came, she stood waiting before the guards even opened the great doors. She had made her decision. If they were going to put her joy on trial, she would not let them do it without her voice in the room. They summoned Elias before the throne at first light. No charges were read, no accusations spoken, only a formal summons delivered by a trembling aide and a pair of guards who refused to meet his eye. Josie clutched his sleeve as he got dressed. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. He knelt, kissed her forehead. "I don't think they know what to call this." When he entered the throne room, it was already full, more full than he'd ever seen it. Nobles in layered silks, diplomats with lenses for eyes, court advisors stiff with ritual, and in the center of it all, the queen. Her face unreadable, her crown dimmed. Elias stood alone on the polished obsidian floor. "Elias Ward," came the voice of the royal advisor, "you are called to speak before this court on matters concerning the well-being and emotional development of Her Royal Highness, Princess Nyari of Elindra." Elias blinked. "You're putting Peekaboo on trial?" No laughter, only silence. The advisor continued, voice clipped. "You have engaged in repeated, unsanctioned interactions, emotional induction without consent, behavioral influence outside of protocol. I played a game with her," Elias said quietly. She smiled. "That's all." "It is not all," snapped a minister. "Since your arrival, the princess has deviated from routine, resisted certain rites, and shown increased empathy volatility. Her link to you," she laughed. Elias interrupted. "She felt. That's what you wanted. Not like this," another muttered. From the dais, Nyari stepped forward. "I did," she said. All heads turned. "I wanted exactly this." The queen didn't stop her. "I was alone," Nyari said. "All your traditions, your doctors, your songs, I sat through all of them and felt nothing. And then this man dropped a rag, made a face, and everything hurt less." Her voice shook, but did not break. "I chose to laugh. I chose to trust him, not because he's powerful, but because he didn't ask me for anything except a moment." Murmurs rippled through the room like storm wind through reeds. The advisor tried to speak. "Princess." "No," she said. "You asked me to speak when I was ready." "I'm ready." She walked to Elias and took his hand. The queen finally rose. "My daughter was trapped in silence," she said. "Now she sings. Do you not see the miracle, or are you so afraid of joy you'll call it treason?" No one answered. The tribunal eye flickered above them, recording every heartbeat of the moment. Elias glanced down at Nyari. "Guess we're in it now, kid," he whispered. She squeezed his hand, and in that gesture, quiet, steady, full of defiant warmth, an empire shifted, because it was no longer just about laughter. It was about who gets to bring it back. The queen descended the dais slowly. It was not ceremonial. It was not part of any royal script. There were no trumpets or heralds, only the soft tap of her boots against the obsidian floor and the crackle of 1,000 beings holding their breath. Elias stood at the center of it all, Nyari beside him, her hand still small and fierce in his. Around them, senators stiffened, nobles shifted. Even the guards looked uncertain. The court had no precedent for this. No scrolls written for when a queen steps down from height to stand beside a man with a mop. She stopped in front of him, close enough that Elias could see the fine silver threads woven through her dark braids, the quiet fatigue in her eyes. "I've watched you," she said softly, her voice carrying. "Not just today, not just this week, since the beginning." Elias said nothing. He didn't know if he was supposed to bow, or speak, or breathe. "You knelt in silence," she continued. "Long before this court noticed you, you carried grief on your back, and still you came, still you cleaned, and when my daughter forgot how to feel, you gave her back the pieces." Elias cleared his throat, barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to." "I know," the queen said. "That's why it worked." The court was silent, unmoving. Then, before anyone could speak, she reached up and removed her crown. It pulsed in her hands, alive, crystalline, ancient. It had not been taken off in public since her coronation. Some believed it couldn't be removed without war. Others believed it was bound to her skin, but she held it now, steady, and knelt before Elias. The room shattered in disbelief, not in noise but in meaning. The hierarchy snapped. The unseen ladder of protocol cracked like brittle glass. She did not stay kneeling long, only long enough for the gesture to etch itself into the bones of every witness. Then she stood, placed the crown on the ground between them, and spoke. "If joy is rebellion," she said, "then let this be our rebellion." She turned to her council. "I will not raise my child in a palace that silences healing. I will not protect a crown more than I protect the light in her eyes." Nyari was crying now, silently. Elias reached up and wiped her cheek with his sleeve. The queen smiled at her daughter, then at Elias. "I do not ask you to serve," she said, "but I will ask you to stay, not as janitor, not as servant, but as someone who remembers how to hold laughter without crushing it." Elias looked at the mop leaning against the wall, then back at the girl beside him. He nodded. "I'll stay," he said, "as long as there's something worth laughing about." And somehow, the ceiling seemed to glow a little warmer. He came every morning, just as he always had. But now, there was no mop bucket, no checklist of floors to sterilize, no scuffed name tag to remind anyone of his place. Still, Elias arrived early before the stars dimmed and the sky turned lavender with Alindra's twin dawns. And always, Nyari was waiting. She never said it aloud, but she had made it clear in every way that mattered. She would not begin her day until he did. Sometimes they sat in silence, sometimes they played, but most days they traced shapes in the condensation on the throne room tiles, slow spirals, mirrored arcs, star patterns she remembered from when her father held her high above the world and called her light-born. No one dared interrupt. The ministers, once so loud with protocol, now entered the court slower, with care, with observation. A few even nodded at Elias awkwardly, like tourists at a sacred site. They didn't know how to greet him. He was not nobility, not staff. He was something else now, a custodian of something no law had words for. Josie visited the palace sometimes. She and Nyari sat cross-legged for hours, swapping stories, one born of earth, one born of stars, both marked by loss and shaped by the people who stayed. Josie taught Nyari how to fold paper stars. Nyari taught Josie how to balance crystals on her fingertips and listen to their song. One morning, Nyari handed Elias a folded cloth. He recognized it immediately. His old rag, clean now, pressed and folded with royal seal, restored like a relic. "I kept it," she said shyly. "I wanted to remember the first time I laughed." Elias took it, thumbed the frayed edge, and blinked against the sudden sting in his eyes. "You remembered," he whispered. She nodded. "You made it okay to remember." In time, the palace began to change. Not with grand decrees or rewritten laws, but with small shifts. One child laughed in a hallway and wasn't hushed. A diplomat played a string game with a guard during recess. A minister recited a joke terribly and was still clapped on the back for trying. The queen didn't reform the court with policy. She let the light in, and it was enough. Elias never took a title. He refused when offered, said he already had one that mattered. Father. And sometimes, when the day was over and the court was quiet again, he would walk the hall alone, a cloth in hand, tracing the lines left by so many footsteps. He didn't clean to erase them. He cleaned to honor them, to keep the floor clear for what mattered most. On his final day years later, he folded the same rag and placed it on the lowest step of the throne. Nyari, now nearly grown, lifted it in silence. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I never did." Elias smiled, and then he walked out beneath the twin moons of Alindra, his daughter and hers watching from the threshold, the sound of distant laughter trailing behind like a promise kept.